Alright, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Gem Knights. I got my Gem Knight deck here in front of me. Gem Knight Zirconia here is the big beater of the Gem Knight Fusion deck, and he's going to be the one that a lot of people are looking for out of the new Hidden Arsenal set when it comes out. He's the best Gem Knight out of the DT set right now so far. A 2900 beater, he's a fusion of a Gem Knight and any rock monster, and so he's the one that we're going to be looking to build our deck mostly around. Our secondaries are going to be Gem Knight Ruby and Gem Knight Citrine. These are because this is a Pyro based fusion, and this requires Gem Knight Garnet, which is a Pyro type monster. Pyros and rocks are really the power of the Gem Knight deck, and so that's really what we're going to try and be doing there. And then, just as kind of like the filler, the backup, I do have one copy of Gem Knight Topaz and two copies of Gem Knight Prismara. And this is just because I am going to be using a couple Thunders. I am going to have Tourmaline in there, so they aren't, terrible cards. They're just not as useful as the other ones typically. Okay. So, the first thing that I noticed when I was building my deck was trying to get to my Gem Knight fusions. I found that I really don't need 3 Gem Turtles, nor do I need 3 Gem Knight fusions. I really only need 2, and the reason for that is because Gem Knight fusion has an amazing effect that allows you to remove a Gem Knight from in your graveyard from play in order to add Gem Knight fusion back to your hand. This means you can just continually fuse things off, and you can start doing some amazing combos. Probably the most typical one would be with this guy, Gem Knight Obsidian. What ends up happening here is you use Obsidian and another Gem Knight, and we'll just grab out Sardonyx here. If I was to fuse these two with Gem Knight Fusion, because Sardonyx is a Gemini monster, Obsidian's effect will activate in the graveyard, because if it was sent from my hand to the graveyard, and let me special summon a normal monster. Sardonyx counts, so I can special summon that, and I'll get my fusion monster, which means, if I'm fusing these two together, I can go ahead and grab my Zirconia, or I can grab my Citrine right there, and I've already got my fusion, and then I can remove the Obsidian in the graveyard from play, bring that Gem Knight fusion back to hand, and go right into my combo again. Of course, cards like Rescue Rabbit are amazing in here, mostly for the 3 copies of Gem Knight Garnet and the 3 copies of Gem Knight Tourmaline. Really, any deck that's going to play like a combination of 2 top-tier decks, and what I mean by that is, Dino Rabbit was a top-tier deck, and unfortunately we can't go into the same Xyz monsters as Dino Rabbit did, but this can get us Xyz monsters extremely fast, a nice rank 4. And we do have some cool rank 4s, like the Fairy King. All the Gem Knight cards are Earths. The Fairy King requires 2 level 4 Earths. That's really easy to get to. And by detaching 1, all non-fairies will lose 500 attack and defense, which is amazing because you can weaken pretty much everything else without hurting yourself at all. Obviously, we've got Gem Knight Pearl in here, and obviously we've got Utopia. We've got a couple other choices that are always accessible to us. We could go, we could try and do something crazy like a number 32 Shark Drake, but that's not going to be nearly as useful most of the time as some of our ones that require 3, and I'm talking about these 2 guys, Shockmaster and Violon de Sigma. Shockmaster is probably my favorite control Xyz, and Violon de Sigma is an amazing card for getting around monsters that are just difficult to get around. What she does is she allows you to take an opponent's effect monster and equip it to her, and then if De Sigma battles another monster that has the same attribute as the equipped monster, that monster is automatically destroyed. So it's a good way to get around things like, maybe a Stardust Dragon. You can suck up their Stardust Dragon and just slam into them, which is nice. Alright, so kind of some tech stuff that I run, some different things. I run Morphing Jar in my Gem Knight deck. This isn't a very popular choice, mainly because Dark World is very popular right now. But I don't I don't just go and set Morphing Jar willy-nilly just because I want to refill my hand. If I'm going to set Morphing Jar, I know that it's going to be at least a semi-safe situation. I'm never going to set it against a Dark World deck. Never going to set it against a Fabled deck. But it is a rock type, so in that regard, once again, I can use it to go right into Zirconia, which is nice. In addition, the biggest problem that this deck has is running out of hand advantage. When you're doing things like, you hit the Gemini Fusion and you fuse these two out of your hand, well, that's 3 cards that just left your hand. Granted, I'm going to get my Fusion monster, and if I do this right, I'll get Obsidian's effect, which is Special Summon Sardonyx back, and I can generate the advantage back with these guys, and I'll show you how here in a second. But you still have to be mindful of how many cards you're using, because if you overextend, and it is very easy to overextend in this deck, you will lose. And so Morphing Jar kind of gives you the ability to get out of that situation if you put yourself into it. Now, personally, I'm running 3 copies of Sardonyx and 1 copy of Gemini Amber. I used to have more copies of Gemini Amber in here, but have since taken them out. The reason I choose to run Sardonyx as my primary Gemini is because of its Gemini effect. When it is Gemini summoned, if it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can search out any Gemini card in your deck and add it to your hand. Boom! I can get my Gemini Fusion that way too. This is another reason why I'm only going to run the 2 Gem Turtles, and I'm only going to run 2 Gemini Fusions, because I can search out my Gemini Fusion with Sardonyx. And I can search out Sardonyx with any one of my 3 Armadillos. The 3 Armadillos will also go ahead and grab my Obsidians if I need them to, because he is nothing but a giant Gem Knight Stratos for me. I'm going to search out everything, and so what I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to get into this combo where I'm going Gem Knight Obsidian, out of hand, Gem Knight Fusion, Sardonyx. Special summon the Sardonyx, normal summon the Sardonyx, go into the battle phase. That combo tends to work really, really, really well. Sorry. Now, personally, I also recommend running a lot of traps in this deck. It can be extremely helpful to just be able to continuously do things like Bottomless or Torrential your opponent's monsters. In addition, because if you're doing a good job at not overextending, if you're pulling your cards back, so you only have like 1 or 2 big fusion monsters on the field at a time, you don't mind torrentialing the field so much, because even though you're going to lose these monsters, these can be removed from play just as easily to add that Gem Knight Fusion back to your hand, and next turn, you're going to be bringing out more Gem Knights. You can do an amazing amount of damage with just a Rescue Rabbit and a Gem Knight Fusion after a Torrential Tribute. Massive, massive quantities of damage. So, yeah. Also, I think everybody that's playing Gem Knight should be playing these 3 cards. Dark Factory, Mass Production, Supervise, and Gemini Spark. Gemini Spark is pretty much a staple anyways, just because I have Gemini monsters in the deck, and after seeing how successful this card has been in E-Hero decks, it's kind of hard not to just be like, alright, and 2 to 3 spots for Gemini Spark. Gemini Spark is awesome, but you have to know how to play it. You don't want to just Gemini Spark your opponent's card to get it off the field. Gemini Spark is a quick play spell card, and that's how it's meant to be used, is as a quick play spell card, because its benefit when you have to tribute your monster off the field, you get the most benefit if you do this in chain. So like you normal summon the you normal summon, or maybe you special summon. Maybe I special summon my Zirconia. They're gonna bottom, or no, he's a bad example. He's not a Gemini. I get ahead of myself sometimes. Alright, so I summon my Sardonyx. They go to bottomless it. Chain the Gemini Spark. Sack this off. I'm going to get to draw a card, and I'm going to get to pop another one of their cards. This is how you gain advantage with Gemini Spark. And I don't think everybody realizes that, because I've watched so many people just from their hand go boom. And it really, if you normal summon and then Gemini Spark immediately, you're really just hurting yourself. Supervise is awesome. Supervise allows Gemini monsters to make their effects automatically active without having to normal summon them a second time. In addition, this is awesome because when it goes from the field to the graveyard, after it was face up, equipped to a Gemnite, you're going to get to special summon a normal monster from your graveyard. The Gemnites, of course, count as normals. So that's a really good way for us to just, get our Sardonyx. And what's interesting here is, between doing things like this with Sardonyx and Supervise, which is a very similar play to things you see in Zector players do with Zedicaliber and their Dragonflies. The Gemini Sparks and how that works, right there, works a lot like an E-Hero deck. I mentioned the Dark Factory Mass Production. This is because you can pull back 2 normal monsters, any 2 normal monsters, and all these guys count as normal monsters. Every single one of these Geminites count as normal monsters. So I have a ton of them when they're in the graveyard, and as long as I haven't removed them, the Dark Factory of Mass Production is going to help me get them back and instantly go into more fusions. Finally, I do want to point out that I am using 1 copy of Gemini Amber. Gemini Amber is, in my opinion, kind of like the second best of the Gemnites. By discarding a Gemnite, by sending a Gemnite card in your hand to the graveyard, you can target 1 banished monster and add that target to your hand. So what I like to do, this is I'm trying to get the most use out of my fusions as possible. So a lot of times my fusions are dead and these cards are in my graveyard. Gemnite Obsidian and Gemnite Fusion. And so if I have these guys in my grave, all 4 of these cards in my grave, I've probably already removed the Obsidian from play at some point to add that Gemnite Fusion back to hand. But we'll just say I haven't, even. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to say I'm adding it back to my hand right now, and I'm going to activate Amber's effect. I'm going to pitch that Gemnite Fusion that I just brought back to hand, and that's going to let me add Gemnite Obsidian back to my hand. If you can keep this alive till next turn now, you can do amazing things and just keep cycling this combo. You can just keep using this Obsidian, and if you can discard this from your hand, now I can get back my Zirconia. Like, there's just ridiculous things you can do with it. It's absolutely a wonderful deck. You just have to learn that it's not about power cards, it's about synergy. That's the key here. Synergy and not overextending. I've seen a lot of people that try and run things like... I've seen a lot of people run Thunder King Ryu in this deck, and I have watched lots of Gemini players lose because they play Thunder King Ryu in this deck, and so I'm just going to recommend against it. The bringing cards to your hand is a mechanic that the Gemini deck uses quite a bit. Whether it's bringing the Gemnite Fusion repeatedly back to your hand with its own effect, searching it out from the deck, you're using the Gem Armadillos to search cards to your hand, you're wanting Sardonyx to search cards to your hand, you're wanting the Amber to add cards to your hand. You have all these cards that are adding cards to your hand. Gem Turtle adds cards to hand. I really don't recommend using Thunder King Ryu in here because you're just going to slow yourself down, and the faster that you can do damage to them, the better. Just a really quick, cool combo here for the synchro, or fusions rather. Alright, so these are my 2 favorite of the Gemnite fusions. I've got my Gemnite Zirconia and my Gemnite Ruby right here. Gemnite Ruby has a really awesome effect that says that once per turn I contribute a Gemnite monster, and Ruby will gain attack equal to that Gemnite monster until the end of the turn. It also has breakthrough. So by tributing my Gemnite Zirconia, I'm going to pump up my Gem Knight Ruby to a 5400 attacker with Breakthrough, and that's just an amazing effect. So that's always fun. Don't be afraid to do the same thing with cards like Gem Knight Pearl. Also, Prismara. Prismara is does get 2 copies over the 1 copy of Topaz that I run. And the reason for that is the effect. Its effect says that once per turn, by discarding a Gem Dash card that, or excuse me, a Gem Knight card that I have in hand to the graveyard, I can destroy 1 face-up card in the field. The number 1 card that I want to discard, of course, is the Gem Knight Obsidian, because it's going to produce me another advantage with its effect. But that doesn't mean that I can't discard the Gem Knight Fusion itself. By discarding Gem Knight Fusion, I get my effect to pop your face-up card, but in addition, I can remove a Gem Knight in my graveyard to add that Gem Knight Fusion right back to my hand, and so I really don't lose anything at all. Alright, so that's Gem Knights. If you have any more questions, please feel free to let me know, and I hope this has been a helpful little tutorial for you. Peace.